welcome back to our continuing Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of Joseph. Last Sunday morning, we learned from the life of Joseph two biblical principles on how to live your own rags to riches life. And again, I'm not trying to promise you that God will make you wealthy beyond imagination, but God's blessings are always worth more than gold or diamonds. And that's something that we tend to forget. We always focus on, well, I want God to give me money. Well, that's not always what God is about. Sometimes He does, but that's not what God is about. His blessings are greater than silver or gold. But to live your own rags to riches life, you must plan and ban. So first you must plan to live God's purpose for your life, and that is an active action. It's not just sitting back and waiting for God to do everything for you. If God tells you that His plan for your life is to weed the garden, well, the only way to do so is to go out there and actually weed it. And I don't know where that one came from, but that's simple enough. And then you must ban the pain of your past problems. During life, we all experience a variety of trials, tests, tribulations, whatever. And they're there designed to help strengthen us. But we need to forget the pain of those problems and focus on the lessons of the problems. And when we learn to plan to live God's purpose for your life and ban the pain from God's lessons in your life, you will become a much better Christian in many ways. And you will start experiencing the blessings of God in your life, which means you can go from a biblical rags to riches story. It may not be as spectacular as the rags to riches story of Joseph, but why was Joseph put in those positions? Because he was faithful in the little things. He proved himself in the times of trouble that God could trust him, and so God was able to elevate him. That's a rags to riches story. None of the stuff that was at his disposal was his. He was not wealthy of his own accord. He was still a slave. He just happened to be a slave to the Pharaoh. So his life was a little less than, as bad as it was in the prison or in the pit. His riches was not his wealth. His riches was God's blessing in his life, God using him for God's purpose for his life. Now, this Sunday morning, we are continuing our Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of Joseph in Genesis chapter 42, verses 1 through 38. Now, how many of us have ever done anything in our lives that we may not necessarily be very proud of, but then our conscience made us feel miserable for it? Anyone ever experienced that? You don't have to raise your hands and testify about all the bad things you've done in your life. We don't have time to hear all of that this morning. But we all have done something that our conscience seared us, if you will. It kept pricking at us until we felt really bad about what we had done. I mean, I don't know too many people who can say they've never experienced that. In fact, I don't know anyone who can honestly say that they've never felt that. But I'm kind of reminded, and this is definitely not a Christian theme, but I'm reminded of Edgar Allan Poe's great short story, The Telltale Heart. Everybody remembers that one. The guy, he can't stand the old man because he has that old gray vulture eye that's dead and covered up, and it just creeps this guy out. So one day he scares the guy to death. Actually, he doesn't murder him by any other means. And the police are coming over just to talk to him, and he can't stand his guilty conscience is making him hear the old man's heartbeat over and over until the guy goes crazy and literally going crazy in the story. And then, he confesses and turns himself into the police. It's a really neat story, but it's our story. Whether you like Edgar Allan Poe or not, it doesn't matter. That's our story. And we have a God-given conscience that allows us to know when we've done wrong and will continue to prick our hearts until we do something about it. But because of Joseph's God-given ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, he was elevated to the second highest position in all of Egypt. Essentially, you could say that Joseph was then the prime minister of Egypt. He was in a position to sell grain to countries surrounding Egypt as well as, helping out in Egypt. So here, this Bible story now moves away from Egypt back to Canaan land, where we first began, where there was also a severe famine. Hunger and the stress of watching his family starving grew unbearable for Jacob. God's plan was coming together, and the scene was now set for the reunion of Joseph and his brothers. Now we're going to start in Genesis chapter 42, verses 1 through 4. It says, "Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do ye look one upon another? And he said, Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, Lest peradventure mischief befall him. When Jacob learned that there was food in Egypt, and seeing a possible solution to their problem of starvation because of the severe famine, he sent his sons to buy grain so they would not starve. However, he did not send his youngest son. The text stated that Jacob feared that harm may come to Benjamin, Jacob's only other son, through Rachel, his beloved wife. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the fact that he only cared about Benjamin and didn't, share any concern about the older 10. That's not really part of this story as far as what I'm focusing on. But it is interesting to know, why did he care so much for Benjamin? Well, you have to remember that Benjamin is the only son remaining from his beloved wife, Rachel. He worked 14 years for his father-in-law to marry the love of his life, Rachel. And she'd remained barren while all these other 10 kids were born, and finally she bare Joseph. So this is his, as far as he is concerned, his firstborn son. He's got 10 sons before him, but this is his firstborn son, Joseph. But Joseph was taken away from him. He thinks Joseph is dead. He has no idea what's going on. He was told, we found this bloody coat, so he thinks Joseph is dead. So now he has one son remaining, little Benjamin, the youngest of all the 12, and the only remaining son from his beloved wife, Rachel. Now, having already lost Joseph, Jacob loved Benjamin now the most. To lose his only son from his beloved Rachel would have been too much for old Jacob to bear. So Jacob wanted to protect Benjamin, and he sent his other 10 sons to Egypt without him. And I kind of laugh about the fact that the other 10 sons, he sends them, but they're all in their 40s and 50s at this point, by the way. They're not little kids, but the older brothers are, some are above 50, but they're all above 40. But from this chapter of Joseph's life, we're about to learn 3 biblical principles to maintain a clear conscience. First is to allow God time to change people's hearts. You see, people may do us wrong sometimes, and we want to hold a grudge forever, or we want to just go ahead and get right up in their face and try to resolve it. You probably won't resolve it right away. So we need to learn to allow God time to change people's hearts. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 42, verses 6 through 24. When Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they stood in line amongst all these other people to buy food directly from Joseph himself. This direct contact with Joseph was part of God's plan, because they could have purchased grain in any other city. They didn't have to go to this location. As we recall from last week, Joseph set this up all around the country. People can get their grain in pretty much every big city in Egypt. But his brothers came to him where he was at. This is pretty neat. Genesis chapter 42 and verse 6 says, And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sowed to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. Now right here we now see the fulfillment of Joseph's dream, where his brothers' sheaves bowed down to Joseph's sheaves, as recorded in Genesis chapter 37 verses 9 and 10. We've already seen people, I don't really believe in dreams today, but back then God spoke to people in dreams. And here we see, whether his brothers realized it or not, that dream came true for them. But in Genesis chapter 7, 42, verses 7 through 9, and Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come thou? And they said, From the land of Canaan, to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not, or they knew not him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them. How could his brothers not recognize him, you think? Well, remember that Joseph was sold into slavery at the age of 17 and was a slave and prisoner for 13 years. Then for at least 2 years into this famine, so it had been at least 20 years since his brothers had last seen Joseph. They haven't seen this guy in over 20 years, so his appearance would have changed tremendously. Additionally, Joseph was adorned with Egyptian linen and jewelry, and he was clean-shaven, not to mention his speech. Again, he was speaking in the Egyptian language. And if you have ever been to a 20-year high school reunion, you know how much people change in 20 years in their appearance. It is then, at that 20-year reunion, that you may find yourself glad that God did not answer all of your prayers, if you know what I mean. But imagine what must have gone through Joseph's mind when he recognized his cruel brothers. Joseph now had the perfect opportunity to get even. He could refuse to sell them grain or even have them immediately executed if he wanted. He had that power. However, Joseph decided to test them to see if they had changed. So he pretended to not know them and spoke harshly to them. In verses 9 through 14, excuse me. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, Ye are spies to see the nakedness of the land, ye are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. And he said unto them, Joseph said unto them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with their father, and one is not. And Joseph said unto them, That is it that I spake unto you, saying, Ye are spies. Next, Joseph accused them of spying for Egypt's enemies to see where Egypt was vulnerable to attack. His brothers, of course, vehemently denied being spies and told him they were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Now, why they went into the detail about the one that is not, I'm not sure, but nonetheless, they told him who they are. And Joseph's response is, No, I'm telling you, you guys are spies. But Joseph had a plan, and here we see in verses 14 through 20, And Joseph said unto them, That is it that I spake unto you, saying, Ye are spies. Hereby ye shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you. Or else by the life of Pharaoh surely ye are spies. And he put them all together into ward 3 days. And Joseph said unto them the third day, This do, and live, for I fear God. And if ye be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses, but bring your youngest brother unto me. So shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. You see, Joseph knew that nothing reveals our true character like our conscience. If his brothers repeated their sin, then they were hopelessly evil. However, if at great possible peril to themselves they protect their youngest brother, Joseph would know that they had indeed changed. After they spent 3 days in jail with him, Joseph changed his original demand and told them that only one of them would be kept in prison while the rest returned home to bring their youngest brother to confirm their story. Now, at this point, the brothers inadvertently revealed some secrets to Joseph, not realizing that he could understand them. And verses 21 through 24, and they said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. It is important to note that they believed that they were being punished for what they had done to Joseph. Joseph quietly listened in on his brothers' confessions and their belief that God was punishing them for what they did to him. But when he overheard how Reuben had tried to save him, Joseph could not contain his emotions any longer. And in verse 24, and Joseph turned himself about from them and wept. This is a very touching moment. Joseph may have spent many long, lonely, sleepless nights thinking about what he would do to punish his brothers for the evil that they had committed against him. He may have even imagined how pleasurable it would have been to watch them suffer for their sins. But instead, here we see Joseph release 20 years of hurt, pain, loneliness, homesickness, etc., through the shedding of his tears. God's holy word records 6 times that Joseph wept, sometimes uncontrollably. But we do not read of Joseph crying when his own brothers sold him into slavery, nor when Potiphar cast him into prison, not even after Pharaoh's butler refused to help him. Understood that tears can often be a sign of strength and righteousness. A weaker man would have immediately ordered punishment or even execution of his brothers. What Joseph could have done, and what most of us probably would have done, are forgotten in the tears of Joseph. The story of Joseph shedding many tears is an example of God's truth in Psalm 126 and verse 5. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. Joseph has this opportunity to execute vengeance upon the heathen, as it is in Psalm 149. But rather, he tests their conscience and finds that God has, over 20 years of time, changed their hearts. He sees them as a different people than when they sold him into slavery so long ago. So to maintain a clear conscience before reacting to a hurt or injustice, allow God time to change people's hearts. It's amazing what God can do. Of course, while you're waiting, I would recommend that you pray for them as well. But also, we need to listen to our conscience. In verses 24 through 28, and Joseph turned himself about from them and wept, and returned to them again, and communed with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. And they laded their donkeys with the corn, and departed thence. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey provender in the inn, he espied his money, for behold, it was in his sack's mouth. Then he said unto his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God hath done unto us? So to hide his forgiving and loving heart, Joseph returned to his brothers and had Simeon tied up while they watched. He promised one of you is going to stay. Now, we don't know how Simeon was selected. Maybe Joseph still had a grudge against him for something. I don't know. But Simeon is selected, and he's bound right in front of his brothers. You see this? This guy is going to wait here until you bring your brother back. He made a point of enforcing, if you will, the threat here. This guy could possibly die, your own brother. Do you care about your brother dying? They didn't care about Joseph dying, so he's testing them again. But I like how he tied him up in front of his brothers. That just, to me, puts a little smile on my face. It's not that he's not trying to be cruel per se, but he is enforcing this threat. They see he's not being held in a almost said a Motel 6, but that's not a fancy place, a Hilton. He's not being held in a Hilton. He's bound up right in front of them. So they know that they need to do something. And then he loads up their sacks, and he requests that their money be put back into their sacks. And they're traveling along, and they stop somewhere for rest. One of the brothers, unnamed, decides it's time to feed his donkey. So he opens it up, and in his bag is his money. Now, this is a curious part, because you have to kind of wonder, when they found the money in the bag, why didn't they turn around and go back, sir, you left my money in the bag? How many of us, when we're at the store, restaurant, or whatever, someone gives us too much change back, don't you always say, excuse me, you gave me too much change? Now, there are people who won't. They gave it to me. It's mine now. But isn't not the right thing to do to return the excess? Well, of course. Now, this is curious. They didn't. They decided maybe no one will notice, and they just continue on home. But they do say something very important here. This is the first time that they said anything about God. And they said, what is this that God hath done unto us? You know, they're having a breakthrough moment here at the same time of, having a breakout moment. They're having a breakthrough here. They are feeling the pain of their conscience. This is not a pleasant thing. They now believe that God is punishing them for what they did to Joseph so many years ago. And that's a good thing. If we are not responsive to our conscience, we are in a pretty bad place. And if our conscience no longer even bothers to pick at us, then we're even in a worse place. Their conscience is working, and it's working on them well. One of God's greatest gifts to us is a conscience. It seems that some people may not have any conscience at all, but for us Christians, God's Holy Spirit living in us acts as our conscience, reminding us of what we have read in God's holy word and heard from our Bible teachers and preachers. The only way for God's Holy Spirit to work well within you is that you have fed it with God's holy word. God's holy word uses our conscience to remind us of what is right and wrong. So to maintain a clear conscience, we need to allow God time to change people, but we need to listen to our conscience as well. And we need to avoid searing our conscience. It's okay for your conscience to sear you, but not okay for you to sear your conscience. In verses 29 through 38, and they came unto Jacob their father unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell unto them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said unto him, we are true men, we are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father, one is not, and the youngest is this day with their father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, hereby shall I know that ye are true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me, then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. And it came to pass, as they emptied their sacks, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in a sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said unto them, me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And Jacob said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in the which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Once they returned back home to Canaan, the 9 brothers told their father Jacob all that had happened. To complicate matters further, when they emptied their sacks, each sack still had their bundle of money in it. When Jacob and his sons saw the money, they were afraid, and rightly so. Consider the consequences of stealing directly from the Pharaoh of Egypt. That's essentially what just happened. In their eyes, they don't know that it was given back to them, and they don't know why either. But what should they do now? If they return to Egypt, they could be considered thieves. And what would happen to them? Prison or death. If they took Benjamin with them, what would happen to Benjamin? He's with the thieves. So he's probably going to be in prison or dead as well. Notice Jacob's pain. Me have ye bereaved of my children. Now, he's talking to his children, by the way, but me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not. He's already assumed Simeon's dead. I mean, the Pharaoh wasn't known for being a nice guy necessarily, so he's already made assumptions about this. And ye will take Benjamin away? All these things are against me. He's taking this pretty personally. Of course, we would too. Someone attacks our family, we take it pretty personally. Every one of us is going to stand up for our family. Well, most of us would. Some may not. I don't know. Some may say, you deserve it. I don't know. But most of us would stand up for our family. Jacob did not dare risk losing his only remaining son of his beloved wife Rachel. To lose Benjamin, Jacob said, would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. He can't bear any more loss. We've all been there. We've lost so much already in our own lives that sometimes we feel we just can't take any more loss. And that's where Jacob is. Rachel's gone. His firstborn son, that is actually his 11th born son, is gone. One of his other sons, he's gone. And now I can't bear to lose the last of my sons, the last remaining son of Rachel. It's got to be difficult. And he tells them it's going to kill him. I believe that God was using Jacob's words to amplify the convicting conscience in his sons. Just as Joseph tied Simeon up right in front of him, Jacob's words are like burning spears right into their hearts. I would hope anyway. I mean, it should be pretty painful. You see, God often uses circumstances and other people to increase the volume of the convicting voice of our consciences. We must be very careful about turning a deaf ear to our conscience because it is possible to mute what they are saying. Consider how 1 Timothy 4:2 describes people who have done this. Speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. The Hebrew word translated here as seared is the word from which we get our English word cauterize. It means to seal a wound or destroy infected tissue with a hot instrument. This procedure leaves scar tissue behind, but with no nerves, so no sensitivity. When used in reference to our conscience, seared means to lose sensitivity to right and wrong. When we continue in sin, we lose the sensitivity to sin that should be pricking at our hearts. Our conscience is God's Holy Spirit telling us God's will and way. It is a built-in sin detector that God has given us. However, when we habitually ignore it, we develop a seared conscience. This is why we should always strive to be able to honestly say those words of Paul recorded in Acts chapter 24 and verse 16. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. That would be a great thing for each of us to live. But Joseph's brothers are examples of how God uses your conscience to help you live God's purpose for your life. If we fail to follow our conscience, we are doomed to repeat the same sins over and over again. Friends, our conscience can be a very, very powerful tool in helping us live God's purpose for our life. But the key is listening to it, trusting it, and following it. But first you must feed your conscience with God's holy word. You have to take the time to read God's holy word, all of it. And not just trying, as I mentioned all the time, not just trying to see how fast you can read through it, neither. You know, I'll use a simple example. When you go to, say, an art museum, do you just see how quickly you can get from the front door to the back? Of course not. Why wouldn't you just run right through the museum? Because you wouldn't have seen anything. You wouldn't have enjoyed any of the art. Or maybe you go to a buffet. This rings more true for me. You go to a buffet, and what do? You grab your plate and run over to the end and pay for an empty plate? Well, that's what it's like when you just try to race through the Bible and see how fast you can read it. Ooh, I read it once every month. Yay, I'm so happy for you. Did you learn anything? No, but I read it. Reading through the Bible just to see how fast you can read it is useless. It's a waste of your time. You need to be studying God's holy word with the intent of learning something from it. I go to the buffet, I'm going to take my time and fill that plate up because I want to get as much out of it, as much for my money as possible. Same thing applies when we're reading God's holy word. If you're racing through just to be able to say that, I read the Bible through in 1 year. And some people, I read it twice this year. Whoopity-doo-dah-day. That's like, so I can't even think of a good example other than the buffet, but you have, let's say that you have a lot of gold, diamonds, money, and you're living around people who have nothing. Now, you have an opportunity to share that with people in need, or you can hoard it for yourself, and it's when you die, it's still locked up in a safe somewhere. What good did that money ever do you? It did you nothing when you have the opportunity to actually use it for good. I'm not telling everyone you have to give up whatever you have and go give it away to the poor and needy. I'm just saying, we have this Bible. If we're not using it, what good is it to you? If you just carry it around so people can see that you have a Bible, I am pious. What good is it? It's still nothing. And reading through as fast as you possibly can is useless. Take the time to learn it so that God's Holy Spirit can use it to remind you of what is right and wrong, to remind you of God's will and ways, to remind you of God's purpose for your life. That's the only way this Bible is going to do any good, is if we actually study it. And it bothers me when people talk about, I read through. My goal this year, I remember someone saying this, my goal is to read it once a month for this year. That's a lot of reading. I mean, that's a lot of fast reading, but never learning. Now, granted, after 12 times in 1 year, maybe you've picked up a few words here and there, but for the most part, you're not learning anything. This is a very valuable tool to feed our conscience. Use it. Use it wisely. Use it every day. Read it to study and learn. Take your time reading so that when needed, God's Holy Spirit can remind us and guide us, thus helping us to avoid sin in the first place, so you don't have to worry about your conscience. But if you desire to live with a clear conscience, you must live these 3 biblical principles. Allow God to change people. And that includes yourself, by the way. We all need change. We are nowhere near where we need to be. The process of sanctification is a lifelong process, and we need to be actively engaged in that process. Secondly, always listen to your conscience and avoid searing your conscience. So if number 2 and number 3 go hand in hand very well. If you stop listening to your conscience, you're going to sear it at some point. So you need to allow God time to change people. You need to listen to your conscience and avoid searing your conscience. And when you live these 3 biblical principles in your life, then you can live with a clear conscience, which is a good thing. How many of us, when we did wrong and experienced that guilty conscience, how many of us enjoyed that? I don't see any hands raised. Well, now you know how you can avoid it to begin with. We're all still going to do something wrong that we're ashamed of. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of our weak human flesh. But if you will live these 3 biblical principles, you can learn to live with a clear conscience. And of course, another way to help maintain a clear conscience is to make sure that you are right back here next Sunday morning as we continue our continuing Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of Joseph in Genesis chapter 43.